Hello and welcome to this episode of T-Tech. On today's episode, we're going to talk about how to get started using OpenBSD. I do hope you enjoy this one, and let's get into it. Hello and welcome to this episode of T-Tech. On today's episode, we're going to talk about getting started with OpenBSD. So we're going to start here with the first steps we want to take. So these are the bare minimum to get everything going. So we have a desktop operating system. So obviously the first thing is find a suitable desktop or laptop. Well, what does that mean? Well, basically, OpenBSD will run on anything that has a 64-bit processor or a 32-bit processor. So most any desktop or laptop made in the last 10, even pushing it 20 years will run OpenBSD. Now, after that, you do want to go on to openbsd.org and download the appropriate installer image, depending on your system and what you have to have. Now, that's done on openbsd.org, and we're going to go over that in the next portion of the video. But after we get that image, regardless, we download it from their site, and we want to use that image. But the image by itself doesn't do anything. So we have to take that image and we have to use it to make install media. Now, your install media, you have a wide variety of choices. It can either be a USB stick, if your computer can boot off a USB stick, or a CD or DVD. You can even still boot off floppy disks as well. So they have many different options, including even over the network, but that's usually special use cases for that. Regardless though, there's a lot of ways to do this. Once you make your media, you'll want to put the install media into your computer. And if you made it correctly and it's not corrupted, it should just boot up all fine for you. And at that point, it would install, you would follow the instructions on there to install it. Now, the first thing you're going to notice once we get to that part of the video is, well, there isn't as much instruction as other operating systems. But we'll walk you through it step by step, and it'll be easy. Now, after you get it installed, you do have to realize, with most Unix systems, it's a CLI, or command line environment. So, in other words, you're going to end up with a shell or a terminal. On top of that, though, you have to install a desktop environment. A desktop environment is just a set of programs that are able to control your computer's graphics card, and display images on your monitor, and have you be able to move application windows around and things like that. So that's the 5 basic steps. And what we're going to do next is take a look at some of the pros and cons of using OpenBSD. I do personally use OpenBSD, and there's lots of different uses for it. But before we get into that, we'll look at the pros and cons. So, some of the pros and cons. We'll start with the pros. First of all, OpenBSD is probably number one in the security space of operating systems. So they have excellent security. Secondly, they have a small footprint. So I personally, and actually right now, my firewall is a Dell Optiplex GX1. If you don't know what that is, that was made in 1998. So that is a computer that is a 32-bit, 500 MHz processor with 128 megabytes of RAM at the moment I have in it. And that's my firewall. So that gives you an idea of how low it can go. And that, well, it's not the most up to date right now, but it's like 6.3. I've got to update it, but that's besides the point. That should tell you, though, a lot of reliability with OpenBSD. And another important point is the userland and the kernel are developed together. Basically, that means the kernel in any operating system is the bridge between the hardware and the software. So the hardware is all the things in your computer, the CPU, the RAM, the hard drive, and everything else. And the userland is all the software. Well, the software can't do anything interesting, any computations or anything like that, without the CPU, the RAM, and all of that. So the kernel's job is to sit in the middle, and when a program requests resources, it gives it those resources and allocates it time to use them, and then it has to give them back for other things to happen. Well, in other operating systems, usually the programs on top in the kernel kind of get scattered around, and it sometimes makes incompatibilities and things in the system. Not always, but sometimes that's the case. With OpenBSD and any other BSD that I'm aware of, they are developed together so you have more predictable behavior. That's more about, I think, that's why there's such high reliability with these systems. Now, also they have excellent documentation. If you got to figure out how something works, it's very easy to go in and read the documentation, but you do have to get a feel for the system, because one thing, the next slide does say ease of use, but it is a system made by the developers for the developers. That doesn't mean normal people cannot learn to use it. You just have to be willing to learn. So the ease of use is a pro, but it doesn't start that way. You got to do a little bit of digging in the documentation and whatnot. So consistency is the last pro I have here. And that basically, what I mean by that is I just bought a Rock 64 small computer, a little board, and I put the ARM64 image of OpenBSD on there. Everything ran the same. There was not one thing that was different other than the architecture of the binaries and things like that on the system. But that's what I mean by the consistency of OpenBSD. Whatever you're running it on, you're pretty much going to always get that pristine, reliable environment. Now, as with anything though, we do have to talk about the cons of the system. So the first one is, it's not as well known. If you're here, you've at least heard about it a little bit, enough to know the name. Another con is security focused. Now, why did I just contradict myself? Well, the thing is, to be security focused means they have to take out a lot of features that are convenience, but they have to take them out of there for security. A good example is there's no loadable kernel module support in OpenBSD. So you can't, on the fly, add support for new hardware by loading a driver for it. And there's other things. You can't emulate Linux binaries in OpenBSD. But these changes are for the developers because they want a security-focused operating system. As I said, I use it as my firewall. It's a very secure system. But the next con may be a little confusing if you've never heard of this before. There's not as many ported applications. Now, this just means in OpenBSD, applications most times that are written for wrote for Linux are, the source code of them is tweaked and changed to be able to run on OpenBSD. And that when you do that, that's called a port. They also have to do that to port it to other architectures as well. But the hardware support is another con, and that's mostly because it's not as cutting edge with what they have time to develop and sometimes what they want to support as far as security-wise and just manpower and if it's proprietary hardware or not. That brings us to our last con. No binary-only drivers. Basically, this means if the developers cannot get the source code for a driver to run a piece of hardware with their kernel, they're not going to have that driver in their source whatsoever. So that is why that can be a con, because your wireless cards, I can tell you right now, they're not as supported, and your graphics cards are definitely not as supported. That doesn't mean you can't do it though. There are a lot of them that are supported, especially the ones that are built into Intel and AMD CPUs. Now, next we're going to talk about some use cases. Now, I already told you the first one, firewalls and routers. I do that all day. I love that for that. Next one is IDS and IPS systems for network security. Servers like web servers, email servers, things like that. You can even use it as wireless access points. You can get a supported wireless card, and you can put it in access point mode, so master mode, and get a wireless access point based on OpenBSD and do all the cool things without having to use a Netgear, Linksys, something like that. Now the next part's a little odd, a switch or a bridge. Now I do mean a layer 2 switch. You can use a bridge interface, but it is based in software, so it is a little bit slower, and the cost of buying all the Ethernet NICs you would need to make a bigger switch, there's a certain line where that may not be beneficial. But you can do it though. And what we're here to talk about today, of course, is the desktop and laptop use case, where we're going to make a desktop environment with it. And lastly, I mentioned single board computers. These are like Rock 64, Raspberry Pis, things like that. That's good for that as well. So the last thing we're going to talk about is just some resources to help you start learning about it if you're still a little apprehensive and you want to have a little more help. The first one here, first link, is for the FAQ on their website. If you read through that, it'll take you from zero to knowing quite a bit about it. Secondly is mostly after you get it installed, this comes into play. The manual pages. In Unix systems, any software, driver, anything you can think of usually has a man page that tells you how it works. And you can get to them on the system, or you can get to them on their web site there as well. But after that, we're going to talk about the project goals. You can go there and just see where the project's going and kind of get a feel of why they're security focused and things like that. Another page that's a really good read is the innovations. This tells you all the cool security things they have implemented in the operating system. So the platform page is supported hardware. It gives you an idea of all the different hardware that OpenBSD can run on, because it's much more than just 64-bit and 32-bit machines. Next is Wikipedia. Just reading through there, there's a lot. And the last three here are more for people that want to look at the source code, and maybe you're a software developer. You want to get in there, change some stuff, whatever, because this is all open source. So you can change it, you can fork it, meaning basically you can take it and make your own version of it. You can go to the GitHub website. That's the operating system source code. That means the userland that we talked about in the kernel, that's where all that is, inside of that source tree. You can check all that out onto your computer and edit it and things. The ports is all that ported software. So it's a good way to go through before you might install and see what applications are available. And if you're good at programming, you can port your own applications to OpenBSD, no problem. And the last one is if you didn't want to use GitHub, you can use their website. They have a concurrent versioning system interface on there, and you can just see it from there if you prefer. But with all of that, this is our first part of this video, and in the second part, we're going to go out to openbsd.org and download our image. So I will see you in just a second. Okay, welcome back. So after we open up our web browser, in whatever search engine you want, type OpenBSD, all one word, and we want to go to the link that says OpenBSD and make sure it is openbsd.org. Okay, once we get here, you can click on the current release here, and that's the current release 6.4, released October 18th this year. You can also click up here on download, and here are some of the links there I discussed in the opening. So what we'll do today is go to the download tab, and these are some options. This is the one for the USB flash drive. That's the FS file, and AMD 64 here means 64-bit, and i386 means 32-bit. Now, 32-bit will run on 64-bit, but 64-bit will not run on 32-bit, so keep that in mind when you're picking the image you need. And the install ISO here is for a CD or DVD. Now, it is perfectly fine to just select the architecture you need right from here, and if you click that, it will start the download. If you need a mirror closer to you, you can click mirror sites and go through there. And if you have to, it usually will select it automatically for you. But if you want to go there, you can just click that, click a mirror number, and then you can click the release number here, find your architecture, and you have another way to access those same files, the ISO and the FS and all of that. But that was just one way to do it, because there's multiple. The easiest way to do this is just click the current release, and this tells you more about it, and it'll tell you about the FTP page, things like that, and basically takes you to the same site. But that's a good way to learn about the changes they've made. Click on the number again for the release, the architecture, which in our case is 64-bit, and I want the ISO file, so we're going to click that, make sure Save File selected, and save our file. So next, once you've taken that ISO and burned it to a disk, we're then going to boot our computer up with it and start the installation. So I will see you in 1 second. Okay, now that we have our install image, we're going to talk about how to make the install image and put it onto on media for us. So if we're on Windows and we downloaded the ISO, we're going to go type image burn into a search engine, go to the image burn website, and we're just going to scroll all the way to the bottom here, and under the newest release post here, we're going to click here to download, and you want to pick Mirror 7, otherwise you're going to end up clicking a wrong link. And at this point, just save the exe file and then install it there, and you'd pick the ISO, put a blank disk in the CD drive, and it will burn it to it for you. If you got the FS file instead for a floppy disk or a USB stick or something, what you would search if you're on Windows is Etcher, and I click this link here, and because it is a FS image, see how it says Flash OS images to SD and USB, you can download it for Linux, for Windows. The best one probably is portable for us, so it doesn't install and mess up your registry and things like that if you don't want it later. But we'll just click the portable version for 64-bit, save that, double click it, and you're all good. So those are the two ways, if you're on Windows, to deal with making the media if you have an ISO file or a FS file. So next we're gonna we've made the media, and we're gonna boot up our computer and start the installation. I will see you in 1 second. Alright, now we're just booting up our install media on our computer here. And now in this demo it is virtualized, but this is essentially the same as having it in a real computer. Okay, now there isn't anything of a GUI, this is just the CLI. What we want to do is type I for install and hit enter. Now as the key map here, that's how the keyboard is detected, we're going to go ahead and hit the question mark if you didn't know to pick the one you need. We'll choose US here. Now the host name identifies the machine on the network. We'll type TTEC here. Now don't put any special characters in there like spaces or underscores because it won't accept it that way. Now this will give us internet connectivity, so we'll accept the default here. We'll accept the default of DHCP, that'll just automatically give us an IP address. And we can say none for IPv6. And now we're done configuring the interfaces, so we'll say done on that. We'll accept the default domain name. And now the root account, if you come from Windows, is basically the administrator account. So we'll just choose a very strong password for this user. Just type it 2 times. And here with SSHD, this is how you manage the system over a network. Now normally we would have this enabled, but as we're getting started and this is just a desktop system, we're going to say no because this can be a security risk. Now the X Windows system manages all of the things with the desktop environment, so we are going to say yes here. Now this would have automatically started it if we say yes, but we're going to say no for now on that one. And this is our separate user for everyday use. We're going to say TTEC here. And we'll type a separate password, so if he is compromised, it won't compromise the root account. And the time zone, we'll just pick America, New York is fine for for me, but we'll do a question mark if you didn't know, and just pick the one you need. But we'll accept the one we had. Now, the hard drive found is fine, but if you do have multiple hard drives, we're going to do a question mark and pick the one we need out of the list. In this case, I have one, so we'll just do that. We're going to use the whole disk, and we're going to use the default partitioning and formatting scheme. So we'll go ahead and let that run. Okay, the sets are all the software in OpenBSD, so you can feel free to do HTTP if you because we have the internet connection, but we're going to use the CD for the moment. The path name is fine, we'll hit enter, and we just want to install all the sets. And the signature verified, you don't have to necessarily have this. If you use HTTP, it will download that file for you, but we don't have that right now because it's not on the disk by default. So we're going to say yes to continue without verification. And here I'm going to go ahead and pause the video because this takes a little bit, and I will see you in 1 second. Okay, that's all done. We'll accept the default of done there, and this will set our time for us, so we'll say yes there, and let it finish up its last few steps. And once this is done, we'll be all ready to go. This part can take a little bit depending on the speed of your system. Okay, we're all done installing now. So at this point, reboot. So accept that and hit enter. Make sure to take your installed media out of your computer you're using. So either take it out your USB or your CD, just take it out of the drive. Okay, at this point we are going to reboot, and I will see you back once this reboots, and we'll get started with the desktop environment configuration and everything. Alright, now we're booted back up. So now we need to actually do some stuff from the command line. So first thing we're going to do is log in as root and give the password. Okay. Now, the main thing to know is in Unix, we're going to go over the few commands to navigate. The first thing we want to do is know about the cd command, so change directory. We actually need to edit a file to get started. So we're going to change directory to etc, and we're going to make a new file in etc, but this is actually an important configuration file. We're going to vi doas.conf, and what we're going to put in this file is permit, and then the username we had at installation, so ttech as space root. Now basically this is so when we log in as that user, we can still do things as root when we need to. So to save this, we're going to hold shift and type Z twice, and that actually configures the do as program in the configuration file. So believe it or not, we just did our first Unix configuration. I mean, typing things in that file is basically the same as putting things in an interface. So it's the same concept. But if we do a pwd for print working directory, we're in etc, and if we cd back, we'll be back in root where we started. So after that, the next most important thing to do is when we first get a system installed, we want to use the syspatch utility to update the system. So at this point, we would just do syspatch, and if you have internet connectivity, it will start to pull down all of the patches and install them for you. So these are very important, and actually this one's for the X server, a vulnerability that has to be patched. So we're going to pause this, but when it's all done, it will just return you back to the hashtag symbol. So we'll be done in 1 second, and I will be right back. Alright, we just completed the patch. So after a patch, it is important to reboot the system, and that goes with any operating system. So we're going to reboot, and I will see you in 1 second. Okay, now that we're rebooted, let's log in as our normal user. So we're going to log in as ttech, and the password we gave it in the installation. Now, as far as the doas.conf file we edited, put whatever user you created. So don't think you have to do exactly what I'm doing as far as usernames and things like that. But what we'll do is do the command do as, and now we're going to make sure we have all of our patches. So we're going to do as syspatch. And now, what password do we type? We pass our user's password, not root. So we type the user's password. Okay, so there's no patches because there was no output. But the base installation does come with a desktop environment. So how do we get there? We just type the command start x for start xorg, which is the graphics server in Unix. So if we hit enter, there we go. We have a desktop environment. Now there is a clock and some other stuff, but with this one, this is the basic one. You may like it, you may not. But from here, to show you that you can run the same commands from inside of a desktop environment as you can in the shell, because this is called a terminal emulator now. So it's emulating that terminal underneath. So this is what is under every GUI, is commands. What we'll do is now we want to install some software. So we're going to do as package _add. And what are we going to install? We're going to install Firefox. So we're going to hit enter on that. Type our password. And now it should start the installation. As long as we have internet connectivity, it will work, because this goes off of, to the servers that are storing these packages. And this is what I meant about the software that's ported, by the way. All these packages you see on Firefox 62, someone had to port Firefox to OpenBSD. So that is also why it's 62 and not the newest version. Because I think the newest version at the moment of this video is 64. But that's just how it goes. People have to take time out and do this to get it ported over. So I mean, it does take a while, especially with something huge like Firefox. But with that, we'll pause the video, and when this is done installing, I'm going to come back and we're going to launch Firefox and see Firefox work. So I will be right back. Okay, we just finished installing Firefox, and what we're going to do is run Firefox just by typing it as a command from the terminal. Hit enter and it should start up for us. And there we go. So let's go just quick test it. Let's go to Google just to prove that we have a functioning web browser in OpenBSD. And there we go. Now we do have a little bit of low bandwidth here, so I'm not going to be able to show in-depth websites, but that does prove it is connected. So you are able to do that with Firefox. It has all the features. I mean, whoops, there's another cool thing about this window manager we'll cover. And I was very confused when I first saw it when I started. But if you scroll all the way over and hold it, you're in another workspace. Now if we go over again, we're in the third workspace. But you keep scrolling just naturally. That was confusing at first. I couldn't figure out why my windows kept disappearing. But that's how this desktop environment works. I believe it's VFWM. I believe. But don't quote me on that. Actually, we'll just go ahead and click this here. Yep, FVWM, sorry. But that is how we get Firefox going on there. Very simple. To exit out, we can just always click here in the exit menu and quit. And by the way, this is not the only window manager. This is just the default window manager in OpenBSD. So you can install GNOME 3, you could install Fluxbox. If you search for Unix window managers or something like Unix desktop environments, you'll find a huge list on Wikipedia about that. And most of them are ported over to OpenBSD, so you can use them. They're awesome though. So one more thing, I did install LibreOffice during the break, so we will type LibreOffice. And now other desktop environments would have this in a menu. That's another thing. So don't think this is the only way to go with this. And we're going... Alright. And just to show it works, we'll open up the writer tool. Okay, and just type... This is a test of LibreOffice running on OpenBSD. Awesome. So again, to go out of there, we can just go to File and Exit, and don't save. And just one more quick thing, go to there again, and calc spreadsheet, do some spreadsheet information. So you can definitely use this for basic office tasks, and with Firefox you can use any cloud applications. Google Drive, OneDrive, you can use Google Docs, whatever you want to use. So you have a lot of options, but this is fully functional. We could fill out some information there and do all of the features. And the maintainer of this port did a fantastic job. But that is the beauty of OpenBSD and open source in general. So, with all that, I hope this was a very nice little introduction to how to use OpenBSD on the desktop, and that it is possible and not really all that scary. So, with all of that, I do hope you enjoyed this video and learned something useful. I'm Tyler with TTech. I'd like to thank you for viewing, and have a very nice day.